I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Karen, Eldridge's silver Mercedes, pull into my driveway at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday. I had just finished my first cup of coffee and was standing in my garage in Scottsdale, Arizona, admiring the new Generac generator I had installed over the weekend. The thing was a beast, a 22-kilowatt backup power system that could run my entire house during the frequent summer brownouts we got in this part of town. I had spent 2 full days setting it up with my buddy Marcus, making sure everything was level, properly ventilated, and safely connected to my home's electrical panel. The concrete pad was fresh, the gas line was professionally installed, and I had even planted some decorative shrubs around it to make it look less industrial. Karen stepped out of her car wearing her usual uniform, a crisp white blouse, designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and sunglasses that covered half her face despite the early hour. She was the president of the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association, and in the 3 years I had lived in this neighborhood, she had made it her personal mission to find fault with everything I did. "Yates Morrison," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We need to talk about that monstrosity you have installed on the side of your house." I set my coffee mug down on my workbench and walked out to meet her, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Good morning, Karen. The generator, it's completely up to code. I had it inspected by the city yesterday, and they signed off on everything." She pulled a folder from under her arm and flipped it open with the practiced efficiency of someone who loved delivering bad news. "That may be, but you violated HOA regulations by not submitting an architectural review request before installation. Section 12.4 of the CC and Articles clearly states that any external modifications to properties within Saguaro Heights must be approved by the board before construction begins." I felt my jaw tighten. "It's a generator, Karen. It's a safety feature. We lose power at least once a month during the summer, and last year my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, nearly died from heat stroke when her AC went out during that 3-day outage. Then Mrs. Patterson should have submitted a proper request as well if she wanted to install one," Karen said, her lips pursing into a thin line. "The rules exist for a reason, Yates. They maintain property values and ensure that our neighborhood maintains its aesthetic standards. That generator is an eyesore, and I am issuing you a formal violation notice. You have 14 days to remove it, or you will face daily fines of $100. "You cannot be serious," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I spent $8,000 on that installation. The concrete pad alone cost $1,200. You should have thought of that before you proceeded without authorization," she replied, pulling a document from her folder and holding it out to me. "This is your official notice. You have the right to appeal to the board at our next meeting on the 15th, but I can tell you right now that your appeal will be denied. I have already discussed this matter with the other board members, and we are in unanimous agreement." I took the paper from her hand, resisting the urge to crumple it into a ball. "I will be at that meeting, Karen, and I will be bringing documentation showing that my generator meets all city, county, and state requirements. I will also be bringing photos of at least 3 other houses in this neighborhood that have external modifications that were never approved by the board, including your own pool house that you built last year." Her face flushed slightly. "My pool house was approved through the proper channels." "Really?" "Because I requested the architectural review records last month through the HOA portal, and there is no submission for any pool house at your address. Funny how that works." Karen's expression hardened. "I would be very careful about making accusations you cannot prove, Yates." The board takes defamation very seriously." She turned on her heel and walked back to her car, pausing before she got in. 14 days. Remove the generator or face the consequences. I watched her drive away, then looked down at the violation notice in my hand. The document was professionally printed on HOA letterhead, complete with legal language about enforcement procedures and escalating penalties. At the bottom was Karen's signature, along with those of the other two board members, Patricia Newsome and Douglas Fitzgerald. I knew Patricia slightly. She was a retired accountant who mostly went along with whatever Karen wanted. Douglas was a lawyer who had moved to the neighborhood about 6 months ago and immediately joined the board, probably because he enjoyed the petty power it gave him. I pulled out my phone and called my friend Jake, who was a real estate attorney in Phoenix. He listened to my explanation and then sighed heavily. "Yates, I hate to tell you this, but she is technically right. HOAs in Arizona have broad authority to enforce their CC and Articus, and if you did not get pre-approval for an external modification, they can force you to remove it." "Even though it's a safety feature?" I asked, feeling my frustration mounting. "Even then," Jake confirmed. "Look, your best bet is to show up at that board meeting and make your case. Bring photos showing how you have screened it with landscaping, bring the city permits and inspection reports, and emphasize the safety aspect. Sometimes these boards will back down if you make enough noise and have the law on your side. But be prepared for them to deny your appeal. If they do, you will need to decide whether to remove the generator or fight it in court, which will cost you way more than $8,000. After I hung up with Jake, I spent the rest of the morning researching HOA law in Arizona and documenting every aspect of my generator installation. I took detailed photos from every angle, printed out copies of all my permits, and even got a written statement from the electrician and the gas company inspector who had signed off on the work. I also started documenting every other violation I could find in the neighborhood. Satellite dishes that were visible from the street, unauthorized paint colors, basketball hoops in driveways, and yes, Karen's mysterious pool house that had no paper trail. Over the next 2 weeks, I became something of an expert on HOA regulations. I learned that Arizona revised statutes Section 33-1709, specifically addressed homeowner rights regarding solar panels and energy efficiency improvements, though generators existed in a legal gray area. I learned that HOAs could be held liable if their arbitrary enforcement of rules led to safety issues. I learned that board members could face personal liability if they were found to be acting in bad faith or violating their fiduciary duties. I also learned something much more interesting while going through the neighborhood's water utility records, which were public information. Saguaro Heights had its own private well system that serviced all 83 homes in the development. The well system consisted of a primary well, a backup well, and a series of pumps and storage tanks that maintained water pressure throughout the neighborhood. The entire system was located on a small parcel of land at the edge of the development, right behind my property line. What made this particularly interesting was that the well system's electrical service came from my property. When the neighborhood had been developed 15 years ago, the builder had run the electrical line for the well system from the main panel in what would eventually become my house. The arrangement was documented in the original development plans, and a utility easement had been recorded giving the HOA access to the electrical connection. According to the county records, the HOA paid a monthly fee to whoever owned my house to cover the electricity costs for running the well system. I had known about this arrangement when I bought the house, of course. Every month, the HOA direct deposited $75 into my account to cover the well system's electrical usage. It was a weird setup, but the previous owner had explained that it was actually a benefit because it meant my electrical service had been upgraded to accommodate the additional load from the well pumps, giving me more capacity than other houses in the neighborhood. What I had not fully realized until I started looking at the technical specifications was that the well system's electrical connection ran through my main panel, which meant it was downstream from my new transfer switch. When I had installed the generator, the electrician had installed an automatic transfer switch that would seamlessly shift my entire house to generator power if the grid went down. That included the well system, since its electrical feed was technically part of my house's electrical system. I sat in my home office, staring at the electrical diagrams and feeling a slow smile spread across my face. Karen wanted me to remove my generator, but if I did that, the next time we lost grid power, the well system would go down too. And unlike my neighbors, who just had to deal with inconvenience during power outages, the HOA would be facing a complete loss of water service to every house in the development. No water for toilets, showers, drinking, or anything else. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how precarious the situation was. The well system had no backup power of its own. It had always relied on the grid, and in the 15 years since the neighborhood had been built, we had been lucky that most power outages had been brief. But that 3-day outage last summer had nearly been catastrophic. I remembered Mrs. Patterson telling me how she had been unable to flush her toilet and had to use bottled water for drinking. If we had lost water service on top of losing power during a heat wave, people could have died. I had actually solved a major problem for the HOA by installing my generator. Now the well system had automatic backup power without the HOA having to spend a dime. They should have been thanking me, not threatening me with fines. The board meeting was held on the 15th, as scheduled, in the community center at the entrance to the neighborhood. I arrived 20 minutes early with a briefcase full of documentation and a laptop loaded with a presentation I had prepared. The community center was a small building with a meeting room that could hold about 50 people, and when I walked in, I was surprised to see that almost every seat was filled. Word had apparently gotten around about my generator dispute, and my neighbors were interested in the outcome. I recognized most of the faces. There was Bill Henderson, who lived across the street from me and had been complaining about the HOA's landscaping requirements for years. There was Susan Martinez, a single mother with 3 kids who was constantly being cited for leaving toys in her front yard. There was old Tom Winters, who had been fighting with the HOA about his satellite dish for the better part of a decade. I found a seat near the front and set up my laptop while people filed in and took their seats. At 7 o'clock sharp, Karen called the meeting to order from her position at a table at the front of the room, flanked by Patricia and Douglas. She looked irritated by the turnout, but she maintained her professional demeanor as she worked through the standard agenda items. Approval of the previous meeting's minutes, financial report, landscaping updates, and upcoming community events. Finally, she reached the item everyone had come to hear. Next on the agenda, we have an appeal from Yates Morrison regarding a violation notice for unauthorized installation of a backup generator. Mr. Morrison, you have 15 minutes to present your case. I stood up and connected my laptop to the projector, then turned to face the room. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate the opportunity to address the board and my neighbors about this issue. As you all know, I recently installed a backup generator at my home. This generator provides reliable backup power during outages, which have become increasingly common in our area. What you may not know is that this generator also provides backup power to something else, our neighborhood's water system. I clicked to the first slide, which showed a diagram of the well system's electrical connection to my house. When Saguaro Heights was developed, the builder made the decision to run the electrical service for our community well system through the main panel of the house at 4227 East Cactus Road, which is my house. This arrangement has been in place for 15 years, and it means that the well system is dependent on my house having electrical power. I could see Karen's face going pale as she realized where I was heading with this. I clicked to the next slide, which showed photos of my generator installation. When I installed my generator 2 weeks ago, I also installed an automatic transfer switch that shifts my entire house to generator power when the grid goes down. Because the well system's electrical feed runs through my house's main panel, that means the well system now has automatic backup power too. Free backup power, I might add, since I paid for the generator and I pay for the fuel to run it. Douglas leaned forward, frowning. Mr. Morrison, are you saying that our water system would lose power if your house loses power? That has always been the case, I replied. The difference now is that my house does not lose power anymore when the grid goes down, which means the well system does not lose power either. During the last major outage, which lasted 3 days in July of last year, every home in this neighborhood was without water. If that outage happened today, everyone would still have water because my generator would keep the well system running. The room erupted in conversation as neighbors turned to each other, discussing this revelation. Karen banged her gavel, trying to restore order. Mr. Morrison, the board was not aware of this connection. However, it does not change the fact that you violated the CC and Articus by failing to obtain pre-approval for your generator installation. I understand that, I said calmly, and I apologize for not following the proper procedure. However, I would argue that the architectural review requirement is meant to prevent installations that harm property values or create nuisances for neighbors. My generator is quiet, modern, and screened by landscaping. It meets all city codes and has been professionally installed. More importantly, it provides a critical safety benefit to the entire community. I clicked to my next slide, which showed news articles about the previous summer's heat wave. During last July's 3-day outage, 6 people in the Phoenix metro area died from heat-related causes. One of them was in a neighborhood less than 2 miles from here. Our own Mrs. Patterson, who is here tonight, required medical attention for heat exhaustion. If we face another extended outage during the summer months and lose both power and water, the consequences could be severe. I looked directly at Karen. I am asking the board to approve my generator installation retroactively and to waive the violation notice. In exchange, I will continue to allow the well system to benefit from the backup power at no additional charge to the HOA. The alternative is that I remove the generator, as you have demanded, and the next time we lose grid power, 83 families will be without water. The choice is yours. Karen looked like she wanted to argue, but Douglas put a hand on her arm and leaned over to whisper something to her. After a moment of heated, whispered discussion between the 3 board members, Patricia spoke up. Mr. Morrison, could you please step outside while the board deliberates? I disconnected my laptop and walked out into the hallway, where several of my neighbors followed me. Bill Henderson clapped me on the shoulder. That was brilliant, man. I had no idea about the water system connection. Neither did I until I started digging through the county records, I admitted. But once I realized what was going on, I knew I had some leverage. Susan Martinez shook her head in disbelief. So you are telling me that for 15 years, our entire water system has been running on borrowed electricity from whoever lives in your house, and there is no backup plan if the power goes out? That appears to be the case, I said. It is a terrible design, honestly. The HOA should have installed their own backup generator years ago. Tom Winters laughed, a dry, wheezing sound. They should have done a lot of things. But that would require Karen to actually spend money on something other than fancy landscaping at the entrance. We waited in the hallway for about 20 minutes before the door opened, and Patricia stuck her head out. "Mr. Morrison, the board is ready to give you our decision." I walked back into the meeting room, where the crowd had gotten even larger. Apparently, people who had been standing in the hallway had all pushed inside to hear the verdict. Karen was standing at the front table, looking like she had just bitten into a lemon. "After careful consideration," she said, her voice tight, "the board has decided to approve your generator installation retroactively. However, this approval comes with conditions. First, you must submit proper architectural drawings and documentation within 30 days for our records. Second, you must ensure that the generator is maintained according to manufacturer specifications and remains in good working order. Third, you must notify the board immediately if you ever plan to remove or relocate the generator, so that alternative arrangements can be made for backup power to the well system." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral even though I wanted to pump my fist in victory. "Those conditions are acceptable. Thank you for your consideration." Karen was not finished. "Furthermore, the board will be conducting a comprehensive review of the well system's electrical configuration and exploring options for a more permanent backup power solution that does not rely on a private residence. We will also be reviewing the appropriateness of the current compensation arrangement." That last part made my radar go up. "Just to be clear, Karen, the $75 monthly payment for electrical service is part of the recorded utility easement. Any changes to that arrangement would require my consent and would need to be filed with the county." Douglas spoke up, his lawyer voice smooth and professional. "Mr. Morrison is correct. The current arrangement is legally binding. Any modifications would require negotiation and mutual agreement." He looked at Karen with an expression that suggested he was not happy with her for putting him in this position. The meeting wrapped up shortly after that, and I left with my laptop and briefcase, feeling like I had just won a major victory. Several neighbors stopped me on the way out to congratulate me or to ask questions about the generator installation. By the time I got home, it was after 9 o'clock, and I was exhausted but satisfied. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I got a call from my buddy Marcus, who worked for the Scottsdale Water Department. "Hey Yates, I just heard something weird at work today. Your HOA called our office asking about permits for disconnecting a residential electrical service and running a new dedicated line for a well system. Is everything okay?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "They are trying to cut the well system's electrical connection from my house." "That is what it sounds like," Marcus said. "They were asking about costs and timelines. The thing is, it is not a simple job. They would need to trench a new line from the street to the well location, install a new meter and panel, and probably upgrade the transformer on the pole. We are talking $40,000 or $50,000 minimum. Plus, they would need easements and permits, which could take months." "Did they mention anything about backup power?" I asked. "Not that I heard," Marcus replied. "But you know how people are. They probably just want to cut ties with you after that meeting. Pride and all that." After I hung up with Marcus, I sat in my kitchen and thought about the situation. Karen was vindictive enough to push for disconnecting the well system from my house, even if it cost the HOA a fortune. But there was no way she could get that project approved without a vote of the full board, and based on Douglas's reaction at the meeting, I suspected he would push back on any expensive projects driven purely by spite. Still, I decided to be proactive. I sent an email to all 3 board members, stating that I was aware they were exploring options for the well system's electrical service, and reminding them that any work affecting the utility easement on my property would require my written consent. I kept the tone professional but firm, and I copied Jake, my attorney friend, on the email. Jake called me an hour later. "You are really making enemies over there, huh?" "I just want to be left alone," I said. "I installed a generator for my own safety and convenience. It is not my fault that their water system is poorly designed." "Well, legally you are in a strong position," Jake said. "The easement gives them the right to access the electrical connection, but it does not give them the right to disconnect it without your consent, especially since you are entitled to compensation for providing the service. If they want out of the arrangement, they will need to negotiate with you." "What should I ask for if they want to negotiate?" I said. Jake thought about it for a moment. "If it were me, I would ask them to reimburse you for a portion of the generator installation cost, since it is providing them with backup power. Maybe $3,000 or $4,000, plus a release from any HOA restrictions on generator installations going forward. That way, if your generator ever needs to be replaced or upgraded, you can do it without going through this nonsense again." Over the next few weeks, things were quiet on the HOA front. I submitted the architectural drawings and documentation that Karen had required, using a professional drafting service to make sure everything was perfect. I did not hear anything back from the board, but I also did not receive any more violation notices, so I assumed my generator approval was final. Then, in early June, we got hit with the first major heat wave of the summer. Temperatures soared above 115 degrees for 5 days straight, and the electrical grid started experiencing rolling brownouts as everyone cranked their air conditioning to maximum. On the 3rd day of the heat wave, at around 2 in the afternoon when the temperature hit 117, the power in our neighborhood went out completely. I was in my home office when the lights flickered and died, but within 10 seconds, I heard the generator kick on outside. The lights came back up, the air conditioning resumed its blessed humming, and everything continued as if nothing had happened. I walked to my front window and looked outside, where I could see my neighbors starting to emerge from their houses, looking confused and miserable in the brutal heat. Then I saw Karen's Mercedes come speeding down the street and pull into my driveway. She got out of the car, her face red and sweaty, and marched up to my front door. I opened it before she could ring the bell. "The well system is not working," she said without preamble. "We have no water pressure in the neighborhood." I blinked in surprise. "That does not make sense. My generator is running, which means the well system should have power." "Well, it does not have water," Karen snapped. "I've been getting calls from every homeowner in the development. Toilets will not flush, showers will not run, nothing. You need to fix this immediately." I grabbed my phone and followed Karen outside, walking around to the side of my house where the generator was running smoothly. The electrical panel was located in my garage, so I opened the garage door and checked the main panel and the transfer switch. Everything looked normal. Power was flowing to all circuits, including the one that fed the well system. "The electrical connection is fine," I told Karen. "If there is no water, it is a problem with the well equipment itself, not the power supply." That is impossible, Karen insisted. The well system was inspected just last month. There is nothing wrong with it. Do you have a key to the well system enclosure? I asked. We should go check it out. Karen hesitated, then nodded. We climbed into her Mercedes and she drove to the edge of the neighborhood where the well system was located. The equipment was housed in a small concrete block building surrounded by a chain-link fence. Karen fumbled with her keys, found the right one, and unlocked the gate. We walked up to the building and she unlocked that door as well. Inside, the well equipment was silent and dark. There were 2 large pressure tanks, a control panel with various gauges and switches, and electrical conduit running up the wall to the connection point that led back to my house. I walked over to the control panel and saw immediately what the problem was. Someone shut off the main disconnect, I said, pointing to a large red switch that was in the off position. That is why there is no water. The electrical feed from my house is fine, but someone manually disconnected the power at this end. Karen stared at the switch, her face going from red to pale. That is impossible. Nobody has access to this building except the board members and the well maintenance company. I reached out and flipped the switch back to the on position. Immediately, the control panel lit up, and I heard the deep hum of the well pump starting up. The pressure gauge needles began to climb as water started flowing back into the system. Who has been in here recently? I asked Karen. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her emails. The maintenance company was here last week for the monthly inspection, and Douglas came by yesterday to check on something. He said he wanted to look at the electrical connection to see how difficult it would be to disconnect it from your house. I felt anger starting to build in my chest. Douglas shut off the well system during a power outage in a heat wave, when people need water the most. Karen looked genuinely shocked. He would not do that. Why would he do that? To make it look like my generator was not working properly, I said. Think about it, Karen. You came to my house in a panic, saying the well system was not working even though it had power. If I had not come here with you to investigate, what would you have concluded? She was quiet for a long moment. I would have concluded that your generator was not providing proper power to the well system. I probably would have issued another violation notice and demanded that you remove it so we could pursue other options. Exactly, I said. And I am willing to bet that Douglas has already prepared a proposal for disconnecting the well system from my house and installing a new electrical service, probably with a hefty contract for his law firm to handle all the legal work. Karen looked at the control panel, then back at me. I need to make some phone calls. We drove back to my house in silence. When Karen dropped me off, she sat in her car for a moment, staring straight ahead. Yates, I owe you an apology. I have been so focused on enforcing the rules that I did not stop to think about whether those rules actually made sense. Your generator has been nothing but a benefit to this community, and I have treated you like a criminal for installing it. I was so surprised by her words that it took me a moment to respond. I appreciate that, Karen. I know you are trying to do what you think is best for the neighborhood. I need to call an emergency board meeting, she said. This situation with Douglas has gotten out of hand. She drove off, leaving me standing in my driveway, trying to process what had just happened. The emergency board meeting was held 2 days later, after the heat wave had broken and power had been restored to the neighborhood. I was not invited, but Bill Henderson was, because he was being proposed as a replacement board member. He called me that evening to tell me what had happened. It was intense, Bill said. Karen laid into Douglas about shutting off the well system. She accused him of sabotage and of acting against the interests of the HOA. Douglas denied it at first, but then Karen pulled out the maintenance logs from the well building. Apparently, There is a security system that records when the door is opened and by whom. The logs showed that Douglas accessed the building at 1:45 in the afternoon on the day of the outage, 15 minutes before the power went out. Did he admit to shutting off the disconnect? I asked. Eventually, Bill said. He claimed he was just testing whether the well system would shut down automatically during a power outage, and he forgot to turn it back on. But nobody bought that excuse. Karen asked for his resignation from the board, and when he refused, she and Patricia voted to remove him for cause. It was brutal. What happens now? I asked. The board is going to issue a formal apology to you and to the neighborhood, Bill said. They are also going to revise the architectural review process to create a fast-track approval for safety-related improvements like generators. And they asked me to join the board to fill Douglas's seat, which I accepted. I figure if I am on the inside, I can help prevent this kind of nonsense from happening again. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. That is great news, Bill. Thank you for looking out for me. Thank you for standing up to them, Bill replied. A lot of us have been unhappy with how the HOA operates, but nobody wanted to be the one to make waves. You showed us that it is possible to push back and win. The formal apology came in the mail a week later, along with a check for $3,000 as a goodwill gesture for my installation of the backup generator. The letter, signed by Karen and Patricia, acknowledged that my generator had provided significant benefit to the community and thanked me for my patience during the dispute resolution process. It also included a revised set of architectural guidelines that specifically allowed backup generators as a pre-approved modification, as long as they met certain basic criteria for noise, placement, and appearance. I thought that was finally, truly the end of it. But then, about 3 weeks later, I got a call from a detective with the Scottsdale Police Department. Mr. Morrison, my name is Detective Sarah Chen. I am investigating a complaint filed by the Sagaro Heights Homeowners Association regarding potential criminal misconduct by former board member Douglas Fitzgerald. I understand you were involved in a dispute with Mr. Fitzgerald and the HOA. Would you be willing to come down to the station to give a statement? I agreed to meet with Detective Chen the next day. When I arrived at the police station, she led me to a small interview room and offered me coffee, which I accepted gratefully. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Let me lay out what we know so far, Detective Chen said, pulling out a folder. The HOA has filed a complaint alleging that Douglas Fitzgerald engaged in sabotage of the community water system and potentially endangered residents during a heat emergency. They have provided us with security logs showing that Mr. Fitzgerald accessed the well building shortly before a power outage, and that the water system was manually shut off during that time. They have also provided emails and other documentation suggesting that Mr. Fitzgerald had a financial motive for wanting to disconnect the well system from your property. Can you tell me your version of events? I walked Detective Chen through everything that had happened, from the initial violation notice to the generator installation, the board meeting, and the day of the power outage when I discovered the well system had been manually shut off. I showed her the emails I had exchanged with the board and the documentation I had gathered about the well system's electrical configuration. Did Mr. Fitzgerald ever threaten you directly? Detective Chen asked. No, I said. He barely spoke to me. All of his actions were through the HOA board. Detective Chen made notes on her pad. Here is the situation, Mr. Morrison. What Mr. Fitzgerald did was serious. Arizona law treats tampering with a public water system as a felony, even if the system is privately owned by an HOA. During a heat emergency, when people are dependent on water for survival, shutting off that water system could potentially be charged as reckless endangerment. The fact that he did it in an attempt to frame you and potentially benefit financially makes it even worse. What happens next? I asked. We are going to interview Mr. Fitzgerald and get his side of the story, Detective Chen said. Based on what we find, we will present our findings to the county attorney's office, and they will decide whether to file charges. I want to be clear with you. Even if charges are filed, there is no guarantee of a conviction. Mr. Fitzgerald is an attorney, and he will likely argue that he made an honest mistake or that there were extenuating circumstances. But we take these matters seriously, especially when public safety is involved. Over the next several weeks, I stayed in touch with Detective Chen as the investigation progressed. She called me a few times with follow-up questions and kept me informed about the general progress of the case. I learned that Douglas had initially denied shutting off the well system, but had eventually admitted to it when confronted with the security logs. His defense was that he had been conducting a safety test to determine whether the HOA should rely on my generator for backup power to the well system. The problem with that defense was that Douglas had not told anyone he was conducting this test, had not documented it, and had done it during a power outage when the test would actually affect residents. The county attorney's office concluded that this was not a good faith safety test, but rather a deliberate act of sabotage designed to undermine my position and create a justification for the HOA to pursue the expensive electrical disconnection project. In late August, Douglas Fitzgerald was charged with criminal damage and reckless endangerment, both felonies. The charges carried potential prison time, although Detective Chen told me that as a first-time offender, Douglas would probably be offered a plea deal if he cooperated. The case moved slowly through the legal system, as these things do. I had to give a deposition to the county attorney's office, and I was told I might have to testify at trial if Douglas did not accept a plea deal. The whole thing was stressful and time-consuming, but I felt it was important to see it through. What Douglas had done was not just wrong, it was dangerous, and he needed to face consequences. In October, about 4 months after the original incident, Douglas accepted a plea agreement. He pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of criminal damage and was sentenced to 2 years of probation, community service, and restitution to the HOA for the costs of the investigation and for damages to their reputation. He was also disbarred from practicing law in Arizona, which meant his legal career was effectively over. Karen called me the day the plea deal was announced. "I wanted you to hear this from me directly," she said. "Douglas has accepted responsibility for what he did, and the criminal case is resolved. The HOA board wants to move forward and put this whole mess behind us. We have also decided to install our own backup generator for the well system, independent of your property. The electrical disconnection and new generator installation will begin next month." "That is probably a good idea," I said. "The well system should have its own dedicated backup power anyway." "I agree," Karen said, "and I want to thank you again for everything you did. You could have handled this very differently, and the outcome could have been much worse. Instead, you gave us an opportunity to fix our mistakes and do the right thing." "I appreciate that, Karen," I said. "And I appreciate the changes the board has made to the architectural review process. It will make things easier for everyone in the future." The well system disconnection happened in November. A crew from the power company came out and installed a new electrical service directly from the street to the well building, bypassing my house entirely. The HOA also installed a commercial-grade backup generator at the well site, with a propane tank large enough to run the system for 2 weeks without refueling. The monthly $75 payment I had been receiving stopped, but that was fine with me. I had never wanted to be in the water utility business anyway. With the well system no longer dependent on my house, I felt like a weight had been lifted. I no longer had to worry about the HOA trying to interfere with my generator or about being responsible for the neighborhood's water supply. I could just be a regular homeowner, living my life and maintaining my property without drama. The neighborhood seemed calmer too. Bill Henderson was doing a good job as a board member, pushing for common sense policies and pushing back against Karen's more authoritarian impulses. Patricia Newsome had become more assertive as well, speaking up when she disagreed with proposals instead of just going along with whatever Karen wanted. The board added 2 more members in December, voted in by the general membership, which diluted Karen's influence even further. Karen herself seemed different after the Douglas incident. She was still particular about rules and regulations, but she was more willing to listen to homeowners' concerns and to look for compromises instead of just issuing violation notices. I actually had a pleasant conversation with her at the neighborhood holiday party in December, where she told me she had been doing some soul-searching about her role as HOA president. I got so caught up in enforcing rules that I forgot why we have those rules in the first place, she said, sipping a glass of wine. The point is to make the neighborhood a better place to live, not to make people miserable. I am trying to do better. I think you are doing fine, I said, meaning it. Change is hard, especially when you have been doing things a certain way for a long time. The fact that you are willing to admit mistakes and try to improve says a lot about your character. She smiled at that, a genuine smile that made her look years younger. Thank you, Yates. That means a lot coming from you. As the year wound down and winter settled over Arizona, bringing cooler temperatures and relief from the brutal summer heat, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. What had started as a simple home improvement project had turned into a months-long saga involving HOA politics, criminal investigations, and fundamental questions about property rights and community governance. But through it all, I had learned some important lessons. I learned that standing up for yourself is important, even when it is uncomfortable and difficult. I learned that HOAs, despite their reputation for being petty and authoritarian, are run by human beings who are capable of growth and change. I learned that sometimes the right thing to do is not to back down and not to give in, even when it would be easier to just comply and move on. Most importantly, I learned that my neighbors were not just people who happened to live near me. They were a community, and when I stood up for my rights, I was standing up for their rights too. The changes that came out of my generator dispute, the revised architectural guidelines, the more balanced board composition, the independent backup power for the well system, benefited everyone in Saguaro Heights. My generator still sits on the side of my house, humming quietly whenever the power goes out. The landscaping around it has grown in nicely, and it blends into the background so well that most people do not even notice it is there. But I notice it every time I walk past, and it makes me smile. It is not just a piece of equipment anymore. It is a reminder that ordinary people can make a difference when they stand up for what is right, even against organizations and authorities that seem impossible to challenge. On New Year's Eve, I was sitting on my back patio with a beer, watching the sun set over the desert and listening to the sounds of the neighborhood preparing for the holiday. Fireworks were already starting to pop in the distance, and I could hear music and laughter from various houses where parties were underway. My phone buzzed with a text message from Bill Henderson, inviting me to a gathering at his house. I texted back that I would be there in an hour. As I sat there, enjoying the peaceful end to a chaotic year, I heard the familiar sound of my generator running through its weekly self-test cycle. It started up, ran for a few minutes to keep the engine components lubricated and the battery charged, then shut down again. Everything working exactly as it should. I raised my beer bottle in a silent toast to the generator, to my neighbors, to Karen and her unlikely transformation, and to the messy, complicated, frustrating, and ultimately rewarding process of living in a community with other people. It had not been the year I expected, but it had been the year I needed. I had learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could navigate complex legal and social situations, and that sometimes the right fight is worth fighting, no matter how difficult it gets. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that only Arizona can produce. I finished my beer, went inside to grab a bottle of wine to bring to Bill's party, and locked up my house. As I walked down the street toward the gathering sounds of celebration, I felt genuinely grateful for where I was and how things had turned out. The generator dispute had started with a violation notice and a threat of fines. It had escalated into a neighborhood controversy, then a safety crisis, then a criminal investigation. But it had ended with a stronger community, better policies, and people who were more willing to stand up for themselves and each other. That seemed like a pretty good outcome, all things considered. At Bill's party, I was greeted warmly by neighbors who had become friends through the shared experience of the past year. Susan Martinez's kids were running around the backyard with other children, happy and energetic. Tom Winters was holding court in the living room, telling stories about his decades of battles with various HOAs. Even Karen was there, laughing at something Patricia was saying, looking more relaxed than I had ever seen her. As midnight approached and we all gathered in the backyard to count down to the new year, I looked around at the faces of my neighbors and felt a deep sense of belonging. This was my community. These were my people. We had been through something difficult together, and we had come out the other side better for it. When the clock struck midnight and fireworks exploded across the Phoenix sky, we all cheered and hugged and wished each other a happy new year. I found myself standing next to Karen and we clinked our glasses together. "To a better year ahead," she said. "To a better year ahead," I agreed. "And to second chances." She smiled at that and we both drank. The party continued for a few more hours, and I finally walked home around 2 in the morning, pleasantly tired and content. The neighborhood was quiet now, the celebrations having wound down. Overhead, the stars were brilliant in the clear desert sky, and a cool breeze carried the faint scent of creosote and mesquite. I let myself into my house, which was cool and comfortable thanks to my HVAC system, and indirectly, thanks to the generator that ensured I would never be without power when I needed it most. I went to bed thinking about how strange life could be, how a simple decision to install a backup generator had led to so many unexpected consequences, and ultimately, to positive change for an entire neighborhood. The next morning, New Year's Day, I woke up to find an email from the HOA in my inbox. It was the monthly newsletter, and the lead article was titled "Looking Forward: Changes and Improvements for the New Year." The article, written by Karen, outlined the board's plans for the coming year, including continued revisions to the CC and Articus to make them more reasonable and homeowner-friendly, increased transparency in board decisions, and a new community engagement initiative to get more residents involved in neighborhood governance. There was also a brief paragraph thanking me, without naming me directly, for my patience and persistence in working with the board to resolve a complex issue involving infrastructure and safety. It was a small acknowledgement, but it felt significant. The HOA was publicly admitting that they had learned something from our dispute and that they were committed to doing better. I closed my laptop and looked out my window at the generator sitting quietly on the side of my house. It was just a machine, a collection of metal and wires and moving parts designed to produce electricity when the grid failed. But it had become something more than that. It had become a symbol of individual rights, community responsibility, and the power of ordinary people to effect change when they refuse to accept injustice. As I made coffee and planned out my quiet New Year's Day, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for much of the previous year. The battle was over. The crisis had passed. The neighborhood was moving forward in a better direction, and I could finally just be a regular homeowner again, living my life without the constant stress of HOA disputes and legal battles. But I also knew that if something similar ever happened again, if the HOA or any other authority tried to force me to do something unreasonable or unsafe, I would stand up and fight just as hard. Because that is what you do when you are part of a community. You stand up not just for yourself, but for everyone who might face the same injustice in the future. You make the system better, one battle at a time, even when it is difficult and exhausting and seems impossible. The generator hummed to life again for its routine self-test, and I smiled at the familiar sound. Life was good. The neighborhood was good, and I had learned that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined. That seemed like a pretty great way to start a new year.